Welcome to the Crypto Compliance Podcast by Gatenox.
Gentlemen, I'm very pleased to meet you here in Poland on the ninth compliance conference, and we use this opportunity to record episode for the crypto compliance. And I'm here with Jonathan Benton and Lee Byrne, and both Jonathan and Lee, they had just joined session on sanctions, which is very interesting, and many of this is so much applying to our crypto world, especially in the current political environment. So, Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about your background and what have you done, because your background is very interesting.
Thank you.
Not like
go on, James Bond. Go on,
it's
James
not
Bond.
interesting.
Thank you. So I'm CEO of a fintech company at the moment, which I've been running for a couple of years. We work in the crypto recovery space. We're and developing some technology to be able to kind of improve the number of people that can recover their assets, essentially, because so little is recovered. But prior to that, I have a sort of law enforcement and a little bit of government background as well. So I investigated big corruption cases and complex money laundering and complex financial structures and big frauds, international stuff, and was also an advisor to our government on these matters.
So you are Daniel Craig, aren't you? Did you have access to a private jet?
Next option.
My name's
obviously
Lee Byrne.
We know each other for many years.
Yeah, we do. Yes,
around
we
10
do.
years. Yeah,
it's your misfortune. So basically, 35 years financial services. Spend a lot of time now helping businesses translate complicated laws and regulations into meaningful operational effectiveness. And what does that mean? Really just thinking about what we do and how we do it and simplifying it so that we take more money off the criminals, which is what Jonathan's trying to achieve, give more better information to the intelligence agencies, and go home and think I've done a good job at the end of the day. And more importantly, for businesses to be able to articulate what they're doing in this global fight against crime and terrorism.
Okay, so I guess what you discussed on the presentation today on your panel was very interesting in terms of changes which happen in the sanction space since effectively 70s when the first sanctions applied, and they evolved, and typically they were like political tool, something when diplomacy stopped actually working, but the war is still didn't start. There's new angle to sanctions, right? Like freezing assets and recovering. Can you tell more about this?
I think, it is an interesting change, because we've seen sanctions basically go from a political influence, a soft power tool, to actually freezing hard cash, freezing significant amounts of money. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we're working with my former colleagues in Kiev. And frankly, everybody does see this money as being part of the money that the countries are freezing on their behalf to be able to help rebuild their country. But that's a really complicated legal space to go into, really complicated, simply because you can't just take the money. Canada's been the first to introduce some legislation. The Americans are talking about it. The UK government's talking about it. But to go from I'm an oligarch that's been operating across the globe, and I've got 500 companies, and I'm a multi-billionaire, to suddenly a big part of my portfolio is frozen, and then you're just going to take it. That's not going to be a simple process.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, it's recognising that probably historically a lot of the sanctions activity was from one state to the other, and it was related to economics. So whether it's the Greeks in 300 BC blockading a port, or the British having their tea blockaded around America and what have you, we've got to the point now where it's been disseminated into actual individuals who are suggested as being supportive of the state. And I think that brings a level of complexity to financial services, and certainly in respect to the crypto space. What happens in the traditional sector will be cascaded and will, and is already being implemented in the crypto space because, as we know, historically, criminals, sanctions evaders, not just Venezuela, not just Iran, but North Korea, they're taking, the frauds from cyber crimes in the form of crypto. So therefore, right now, sanctions risk management, I would argue, is more or at least as relevant as the money laundering. And actually, most of the narrative at the moment still focuses on money laundering, but actually crypto and sanctions, you're going to have a more immediate risk of enforcement action from sanctions than you ever will for money laundering.
Yeah.
Because sanctions are a form of foreign policy. And if you don't follow it, then it's effectively treason.
Yeah. And I think, that's excellent. And this is also what, my take with many of the companies or platform operating in the crypto space is like, AML do not apply to us, But I always say, listen, you need to consider sanctions as well, right? But at the same time, they say sanctions maybe, so let's do sanctions. But effectively, in order to do sanctions, you need to do full KYC, right? So it doesn't almost the things that you need to do in order to do proper sanctions is very similar to do AML, right?
Yeah, but I remember we spoke in the Spire. How many years ago now?
Many.
Remember, it was very late evening. There were, to your absolute credit, 200 plus professionals at 9 o'clock at night in Warsaw, all crypto enthusiasts, but they remained behind for the statement of compliance that we shared with them. Yeah. And we said, I remember what it was called, when a regulator knocks. And we spoke then about this is coming.
Yeah.
And I guess what we're saying in this particular piece is, whilst money laundering and the movement is highly publicized, increasingly, it's the sanctions piece. And we're going to see a lot of action in that space now. So to your point, the underlying foundations is know your customer. But what's different is the risk assessment.
Yeah.
And therefore, you can't fall into the trap of saying, well, I have a plan to manage money laundering. That will meet the challenge of sanctions. Some of the typologies are similar, but they're importantly different.
And I think from a kind of legal perspective, when you look at it, there's certainly in the UK now, and I suspect others will follow the common law, certainly common law countries that have similar laws to what we have in the UK, will possibly follow the same theme, which is two things have happened recently. The fact that we can now serve orders on persons unknown, locations unknown. So you don't know who the wallet is because we don't know the wallet ID. We don't know who the owner is. We know where the wallet is. We know we can trace the illicit assets to it. We can say that there's,
so what you're saying is you can do injunction on at the wallet level.
Yeah,
level, right.
Exactly. So it'd have to be held by one of the big exchanges or something like that.
Okay.
So it's not the challenge between hot and cold wallets and that's now you serve. But there's also a case called Tulip, and there's lots of other names involved in it, but Tulip's a bit to remember. And I think what the law's basically done there as well is it's turned around and said, look, if you're told you've got illicit money in your exchange and you allow it to move, you could be liable under a criminal tort. A tort's a wrongdoing in a civil crime. It's not a criminal crime. And then I think the third bit that everybody needs to be alive to, really aware now, because let's be frank, know your customer was fairly basic right at the very beginning when you signed up for an account with any of the big exchanges. It's different now. You've got to send copies of passports and stuff like that. But so there's a whole load of customers you've got who you don't really know who they are.
Yeah.
And that happens in banking. They have to go back, and it's a common problem because the level of checks you do changes. But I think the other bit, the challenge is we've seen now for the first time OFAC go after somebody in the crypto space. So many of the listeners will have heard of Tornado Cash.
Yeah.
Many of us know what Tornado Cash was doing. Investigators and detectives like myself were a bit nerdy, and we're watching it and we're looking and we're working out the transactions and whether it's one of the four methods you use to work out what's going in and out. And you see it broken up. But Tornado Cash is now sanctioned under OFAC. we were looking at tornado cash and could see money that was going to high risk place.
Yeah.
So I think that's another level of compliance challenge now.
That's corporate risk. Let's not forget someone like Vinnick, who's taken off the beach in Greece and repatriated to...
That's a nice name.
Repatriated.
So what happened?
Under duress to the States. And that's very personal. So I think, to your point, that there are degrees of non-compliance, which is absolute ignorance. That's not acceptable. To, we've been unknowingly used, but we had systems and controls in place. And then there's willful blindness. Yeah. Or then collusive conduct. And I think actually, in respect to sanctions, because of the strict liability, and you've got a better legal qualification than I, is the reality is whereas under money laundering it's reasonable and proportionate risk-based, there is a strong argument that there is no concept of risk-based approach. Yeah. Although actually conceivably you should be applying risk-based because, and I think again that's another reason why probably sanctions right now should feature, in my opinion, higher than money laundering.
Yeah, no, definitely that's my approach as well. But at the same time, it's when you, again, that's the market approach, like, oh, we are the centralized exchange, so it doesn't apply to us, we can set us up, it's just a code. And it was like, when you look at the tornado cash, issue or, the case is, well, it was a code, but you benefited from this. That's one, so benefiting from the content. And then you set this up, for the purpose of kind of this disconnecting original source and the outcoming source. And in the area of sanctions, even playing with this type of tools would be already kind of trying to bypass sanctions and trying to create something which is allowing you to do so, right?
Yeah, and I think if I was a compliance officer for one of the big exchanges, I'd be probably working very long hours, and I'd be quite stressed at the moment because there's not only, and we said it downstairs on the stage when we were talking. The other problem here is that there's a very important point Lee just raised, which is strict liability. Yeah. This is strict liability. It's not, I've got a defense for money laundering.
So let's break this down because, I think for many people on our podcast would not understand the strict liability and defense. This is the terms which are...
So in law, and I'm going back to many, many years ago at law school now, but in law, you have two types of offences. One that where you have to have... In English, or we call it the mens rea. It's a Latin word. There's mens rea and actus rea. They're interesting words, but mens rea, so mens, M-E-N-S, is the mental stimulation, the mental mind thinking, right, so I see that bottle there. Mentally, I'm going to go and take it. I know it's not mine, but I'm taking it. I want it, and I'm going to go off, and I'm going to permanently deprive you of it. So I've done something. I've thought about it. I know it's not mine. I've taken it. I've done the actus rea, the act. And I've walked off. Yeah. I've stolen it. Yeah. So I've committed theft. That's a two-part process. Strict liability, one-part process. I pick it up. I'm liable straight away. Yeah. And that's probably the most simplest way I can describe it. And that's the problem for financial institutions. You touch it, it goes through your system. It's strict. It's basically a case of how much trouble are you in? Yeah. Not am I in trouble?
So if you are receiving funds in crypto coming from sanctioned addresses, countries, individuals, companies, that's basically when you are. If you fail to discover them and stop them and freeze them and report them, then you are immediately responsible, right? Well, let's just... you breach the law. It's not like qualification. Oh, you should have.
No.
You're immediately responsible.
What's important is to distinguish between sanctions, which are state level or specific to designated parties. The fact of the matter is, Iranians per se as nationals aren't sanctioned. No. So receiving money from Iran may well be permissible. It may be licensed. There may be exemptions, which are genuine exemptions. So if we talk specifically about it. So I think that's an important thing to note there is, so an exchange that receives money from an Iranian or a Russian doesn't mean to say it's sanctioned. However, if it then materializes that transaction, that value, let's call it value, is from a source that was designated, is subject to economic or financial sanctions, then the receipt of that money should have been identified.
Yeah.
Because it's suggested that any regulated entity supervised for the purpose of money laundering, which is an all capturing, should reasonably have known and had awareness that that was the case. Member of the public will be fine, but an entity, no, you know about this, or you should have done. So having received the money, strict liability says you should have known about it. The fact that you say, my staff were off sick, I was in the process of getting things, is irrelevant. Strict liability, you're guilty. Now, your defence and what you say is, I've done a risk assessment, I've done training, I've done every reason. All that does is mitigate the level of enforcement action.
Yes.
So you're guilty, do you get a slap wrist, or do you hit the headlines and you have all your finances taken off you?
Yeah.
That would be how I'd kind of...
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way to describe it, because it literally is. It's a mitigation exercise.
Yeah.
So if you've done something, you've got some mitigation.
Yeah.
You've got some plea bargaining. If you've done nothing, you're headlines of national. If you're the exchange that's moved all the money that's supporting. God, the name's just gone.
You're having an aged moment.
Yeah, an aged moment. You know, the Russian sort of private army, Wagner Group.
Yeah.
Wagner Group.
Right.
If you're involved in funding Wagner Group inadvertent, that's a serious position to be in.
Okay.
That's a headline news.
Yeah.
Stock price. Everything's collapsing.
Yeah.
That's a HSBC being exposed for laundering drug cartel money.
Yeah.
I would say it's that big.
Yeah.
In the case of sanctions, it's BNP Paribas, 8.9
Yeah.
billion. That's where I think what your listeners, your followers should be thinking about is, and it's a really good point about the degrees of mitigation and what can I do. First things first is you have to acknowledge that you have a responsibility and a statement of risk appetite or your policies and procedures. You have to do a risk assessment that says, am I even exposed to the risk? Well, yes, you are. So what measures then am I taking to identify and mitigate this risk?
But I think,
That's your risk assessment.
I think
process.
there's even, one more question to ask before we go into the other, things. Okay, risk, understanding, exposure, blah blah blah. Is do I need to be obliged entity in the sense that under the law I'm falling into the AML requirements in order to be liable for sanctions breach?
Okay. So in the UK, if you are a UK national or UK business, you are subject to sanctions limitations. Now, you should have been reasonably aware test applies to financial services firm as opposed to members of the general public.
Right.
So there's a slight distinction, but let me turn it on its head. If you handed a gun to someone who commits an atrocity, are you guilty of a crime? Yes, you are. Actually, if you provide finance to that organisation, are you whether you give a gun or money, the law is that you're going to have to be held accountable for that.
Yeah.
And that's a real, and maybe an oversimplification.
No, I don't think it is.
Whether you provide guns or money.
Very good.
I'm supporting that crime or terrorism.
Okay.
That's not great reputationally, legally. They will find a way to have you. And therefore, the reality is you don't have to use financial or obliged entities to move value around the world.
Yeah.
You can do it through the shadow banking and what have you, the informal sector. But a crypto exchange organization, prejudicially, is perceived as the haven for criminals. Now, we're challenging that, and the good work of Gatenox and other businesses, we're changing that. But prejudicially, it's already considered that, you knew what market you were in, it's high risk. So why didn't you step up? Well, that's willful blindness.
So why, so few, actions, we have on the market, because there's so many. I mean, if you look at the top exchanges, probably you find, already couple which 100% they got money from, sanctioned sources. And it's not even a discussion with the regulator and the industry. There's no even discussion about this.
We don't know. We don't know the numbers of reporting. We don't know.
True.
We don't know how many. We don't know how many the big exchanges are reporting. And
so this could be, simply speaking, reported.
Yeah,
frozen.
There is a way of reporting.
Exactly.
And let's tip this on its head. That even we all know, not just sanctions reporting, but financial crime reporting is I don't want to be too disparaging. It's almost a failed exercise.
Yeah, true.
Because
true.
We've gone from in the UK 500,000 a couple of years ago when I was still in public service, all the way now to nearly 1 million.
Yeah,
2.5. I think the US reaching 5 now. 5 million?
No, US has much bigger number.
It was 2.5 million a few years ago, though.
Yeah,
suspicion probably actually because they report transactions and suspicion.
Yeah, but the point being though, the significant number now. When you see the breakdown of the figures, significant number are from crypto exchanges.
Right.
But I think the exchanges have got to get much smarter about how they're reporting. I think at the moment it's a little bit like the scattergun approach.
I think there's a really important factor here, and also is a lot of regulators didn't understand crypto.
No,
of course,
and they didn't have the people to supervise it. So you've got this kind of gap where initially all the exchanges were able to freewheel, notwithstanding the best endeavours from Coin Firm, etc., saying you should be really doing that.
Yeah.
So the sensible exchanges have taken the steps that are required, and we're not here about them. Those that haven't are either going to suffer a cyber attack because they have inappropriate and insufficient cyber security. They're going to fail regulatory, or they're going to be seized by law enforcement on a different level because they're contrary to public interest, and it's even another level. So, I don't think we should be misled, shall we say, by the lack of action. There will be. Remember, a regulator can go back. That's their behest. They're upskilling, they're training, and they're getting people on board now who understand crypto. That wasn't there 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I think one thing which you also mentioned during your presentation, and it's critical for crypto industry, is the secondary risk or direct indirect, right? And to explain to crypto businesses why, from banking perspective, they don't want crypto businesses because there's controls, regulations applicable are not followed by the industry in principle, right? So it's difficult for banks to accept these businesses because they don't want to take the risk of secondary or indirect risk on them because they are worried about these sanction breaches and customers coming to the exchange and being exposed through this to them, right?
So even on a kind of slightly off topic, but on a fraud basis, but you look at so absolute true story. My son sent me a photograph of a letter he'd had from his bank, and his bank happens to be the one I advise on nationwide. But it said this is an important letter. It said you are no longer allowed to move more than £5,000 a year out of your accounts to crypto exchanges.
Yeah, my
son's been an investor since he was this big. He's invested in crypto NFTs, used to buy and sell designer trainers and everything. Unfortunately, he's not going to go and work in the city as a trader. He's probably going to be in the military. But
thank you for your service, sir.
But my point is, the next thing I said to this is, I said to him, so if you can only move 5,000 now between all your wallets, and how are you going to manage that? And he literally wrote back to me, "Are you dumb, idiot? I'll use my Revolut accounts, which I've got 10 virtual cards. I'll use my and all these other accounts." He said, "I'll just use them and I'll push it through them first and then push it through." So financial institutions have done something. NatWest is another big bank in the UK. They've done the same, as I understand, and it's important and it's really difficult because these are our clients or our members, and they're losing money to fraud every single day. And this is, it's a real and it's lots of it. The big is going into crypto.
Yeah,
I think. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to just finish. Sorry, but what's really important is is I don't think we can back away too much on this. I think somehow we've got to get the decentralized finance and the fiat currency to get closer together to understand how they exchange information and risk. So I think it's the only way it's going to work. I think making the gap bigger is not solving the problem.
100%.
I think the subject of de-risking, which is what you were talking about there, about how do a crypto member or follower, what do they need to understand? The first thing is we are in a business of risk. And the regulators recognize that some risks will crystallize, others will not. And for a crypto exchange or user, and let's think about the users, the US are actually prosecuting user-level crypto if they haven't got AML procedures. Yeah. So this isn't just about the exchanges. This is about peer-to-peer transactions. Anyone who's moving value in support of crime is at risk. So the reality is that those users, those activists, if they have in place policies, controls, and procedures, then there's two parts to that. One is mitigating the extent of any misdemeanor if it's found I have handled the proceeds of crime related to sanctions or crime. But the other thing is to the bankers. Yeah. And I think this is grossly overlooked in terms of your ability to bank what you earn or you use, like in your son, is a different but similar challenge. The bank want to know what controls you've got in place because it's an extension of their controls. It's like downstream banking. Yeah. So my name is X Bank or Building Society. I'm going to allow your customer. Who are you nesting and banking? How do you control that downstream? Yeah. Because the concept of direct and indirect risk is you're my customer. That is a direct risk. Yeah. The indirect is what risks you're bringing that I don't necessarily have sight of. Yeah. And so what I would urge listeners, followers to do is to consider what it is they're able to present as a package of, I know what's going on, I know the risk, and this is what I'm doing about it because I'm a sensible business or user. And those businesses will be fine, or they'll have an easier way. It's those who have gone, no, not yet, I'm waiting for the big noise. It's going to be a nasty landing. It's going to be a hard landing.
Yeah, and I think, like just to close this and, that's, I think, to wrap this up, it's very similar with other sectors, So I think crypto should not feel special because money services business would have the same, let's say, discussions with the banks, the same problems, and they have the same solutions at the end. So I think, in this term, crypto just need to recognize that they cannot be treated as, we just simply technology, because if you talk to them, then it's actually moving value and moving assets, as opposed to simply technology. Right?
I'll give you a really good example of that. Right? I was running a covert operation a number of years ago against one of Britain's most sophisticated organised crime groups, using Albanian couriers to bring in kilos and kilos of cocaine. We were looking at the money side of it, and the money. So two really important facts here. 70% of money seized in Albania is English. It's sterling. The rest is in euros. Second interesting point is the value of the notes. So I don't know if you remember the €500 note. Yeah. That was the gem to everybody to get. If you could get hold of €500 notes, you could take a door lining off, you could pack the door lining full, you could put it behind parts of the engine, parts in a vehicle. You could hide millions in a car, get it across the border, get it out, drive all the way wherever you go in Albania, wherever it is in the world. It doesn't matter, but you get it out of where you want it, where it's vulnerable to being seized. So what happened then? Barclays, and I can't remember the name of the money service bureau, but it was one of the really big ones. Barclays threatened to debank them. And weren't going to supply them any more euros, any more €500 notes. We're going to exit the relationship, a massive relationship, which almost could have, caused an MSB to crumble. Yeah. And I think it illustrates your point exactly, that actually what happens here is there's a knock-on effect somewhere else, and suddenly the big guys, the really big guys, the fiat. Yeah, the regulated banks will go no, and they have the power to be able to switch suddenly the lights off, and that's what they did. They stopped supplying. They stopped supplying €500 notes, and then they said we're no longer going to buy them from Europe. We're not going to ship them over. We're not going to give you them. You just can't. You're not having them because we think they're really, really high risk money laundering. Secondly, if you carry on, you're not going to be our customer anymore. Yeah.
All right.
But
Jonathan, Lee, thank you very much. It's been awfully hot here in this room. So, the red face is not anything else. Just
It's not blood pressure then.
Yeah, exactly. So listen, thank you very much. That was Crypto Compliance from Warsaw. Thank you.
Crypto Compliance brought to you by Gatenox.